Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Tiffany Hunter, and welcome to the Life Made Easier podcast. Here you're going to find ancient wisdom with a modern approach. Each episode, we share useful information from the world of energy healing. We develop and enhance your energy intelligence to make your life easier in simple and practical ways.
And I'm Dr. Karen James, and in today's episode, this is our first Questions from Carol episode. Carol is our wonderful producer who has been invisibly working behind the scenes with us since the beginning, and she has been in one way or another involved in our work for around 20 years. And she's been busy gathering some questions from our clients, our listeners, as well as I think throwing in a few of her own. And she's passed those on for us to answer. And we're going to probably do a series of these episodes where we can, answer questions. So if you have any burning questions you would really like us to answer about the work we do or the world of energy healing and energy intelligence, please do let us know. Send them to Carol.
Send them to Carol.
So, Tiffany, the first question on our list is you need to tell everybody how we met.
I can do that. We met at the Anna Freud Center.
We did.
We did, yeah. I was a graduate student and you were doing a gap year, and I was managing a research project that was looking at the effectiveness of psychotherapy and under what conditions that therapy was most effective. And we were doing research together and we really hit it off immediately. I think we both obviously cared about the practical question of what actually works in real life, and how do we know that, and how do we test that, whether it's research or practice or people's subjective experience. And obviously we were both interested in the bigger question about that with alternative health and more holistic ideas. And then we both got interested in energy and how energy works in the body and how that can affect emotions and the bigger picture of that. And we really went from there.
Yeah, I remember really early on us kind of like sneaking off for lunch, and then lunch could sometimes get dangerously long, and then we had to drag ourselves back, and because we just got talking and sometimes about work, but about all kinds of other stuff, and really just I think sometimes in life you just find someone who you have enough, loads of overlap in your interests about the world. And that was nearly 30 years ago.
Yeah,
I want to say
30, maybe even 35 years ago.
I think something. Yeah, oh my goodness.
Yeah, well, we've done much since then, and in so many ways it's been parallel, right? We've both trained in energy anatomy and how emotions and how that connects with psychology, and really morphed the training that we've both had in both directions. On either side. And eventually I moved back to the States and set up first worked as program director in a residential unit for children. You went off and worked for the NHS for a while, right? As a clinical psychologist.
Yeah, did my doctorate in clinical psychology, and then we kind of both circled back round to the to the energy healing work, and alongside all our other sort of skills that we'd gathered along the way. So we kind of ended up with a very similar kind of practice, I guess, in terms of the work that we do, which is kind of what then gave birth to this podcast.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Okay, so your question is, what is energy healing?
Okay, so I'm going to answer this with my clinician's hat on. And then I'm going to suggest that you can add the technical stuff because you're way better at that than I am. So the way I describe, and you might say similar, the way I describe energy healing to either to clients who come to see me for the first time and don't really know much about it, and maybe their friend suggested they come, or they would just, often kind of have tried other things and just do some Googling and think, oh, maybe that's worth a try. So one of the few things that I remember from physics at school is that everything in the world is made of energy. And so most of us are very familiar with the kind of physical energy of solid matter. And then there is liquid, which is less solid. There is gases that are even less solid. And then there's another kind of energy, which, and we know that there are particles within each of those types of energy that move. So the particles in solid matter move in a very slow kind of way. Liquids a little bit faster, gases a bit faster. So in my head, the way I've always envisaged it, and I don't know if we quite have the science for this yet, is that then there's this other kind of energy. And we've often talked about how we wish there was a different word for it, because the word energy is used for so many things. But there's another kind of energy, which is that sense that most people probably have about themselves, that there is something else that makes them up, that can't be located directly in physical space, as in a solid part of their body, their arms, their legs, their whatever, and that somehow isn't quite the same thing as their mind, which is where all the thinking happens, that maybe isn't really the same thing as the feelings, the emotions they have, that is somehow something else. And another way of looking at that is something we've talked about a lot when we've talked about kind of auras, and is this idea that we take up space in the world that extends a bit beyond our physical body. So energy healing is essentially using different vibrations of energy that exist in the world to, in a nutshell, either put some of that positive energy into someone's body in a way that will hopefully be helpful to them, to help them release out any energy that's stored in their body that that isn't helpful. So that could be emotional energy, or could be something else. And to then work to kind of tune up effectively all the different parts of their energy anatomy in order to make sure it's functioning as well as possible. And in some ways, that's not unlike what a chiropractor or a physiotherapist might do with your physical body, or a medical doctor in some ways. But taking that kind of idea of you as a whole person and working with your energy system to have it working as optimally as possible. So that would be my kind of beginning explanation, I guess, of energy healing. But you may well have stuff to add to that.
No, I think that's fantastic. I love that. Yeah, what is energy healing? Nobody walks up to a medical doctor and says, "Can you please define for me what physical healing is?"
Yeah.
And then sits and waits for them to be able to describe their entire field of physical healing in 2 paragraphs or less.
Yeah, although as a psychologist, people do often ask me, what exactly is it you do?
Do they really?
And the other question that, I mean, not so much these days, but certainly I used to get was, can you read people's minds? Or you must know what I'm thinking, kind of.
Yes.
That kind of, are you analysing everything I do? Those kind of, so I think perhaps we think we understand what medical doctors do better than maybe other kind of therapists.
Yeah.
Or whoever. Yeah.
I think it's a difficult question to answer, because the person that's asking me that, what is energy healing, and I don't often start off on the same premise. My premise being that we have a physical anatomy, an energetic anatomy, and a mind, and they may not accept that premise. Well, I mean, they absolutely do accept that premise. They just don't know it. They'll accept the premise that if they put electrodes up for an EKG and an EEG, that, when you're putting those electrodes onto your body and seeing what your heart is doing, the energy and the vibrations that are coming off of your heart or your mind, they'll accept that. But if you describe that as energetic anatomy, they might bristle a little, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I sometimes ask people, do you know exactly how your TV works? Most of us do not sit there questioning, like, how does that actually work? And if you really start to think about it, you think, well, personally speaking, it kind of blows my mind a little bit. Now, the difference is that there are people in the world who could very clearly show you and tell you exactly how a television works. With energy healing, there's ways we're still kind of working on that, having good explanations, and certainly having instruments that can sort of accurately measure
very much so.
The person's energy system. So it is different in that respect, but it's not like it's novel to just trust something that you don't really understand.
No, it's absolutely not a novel experience.
Right. We have some water. Too much talking. Okay.
It's absolutely not a novel experience. I mean, I will say I know nothing about what the electrician does when he comes and fixes things. So, very much so, I think most people don't
Mm.
really understand a lot of things. But I actually understand completely why most thinking people have some discernment about energy healing, because I think a lot of the claims and a lot of the ways people talk about energy healing is a little at best fuzzy, at worst distasteful
Hmm.
and off-putting. So I think, it makes sense. But if somebody asks me that question and I'm speaking to somebody who shares the assumption that we have an energy anatomy along with these other parts of ourselves, then the conversation becomes, or if they're willing to at least accept that as a premise for a few moments while we talk about it, then it becomes easy to talk about, well, it's balancing, correcting, removing blocks, making sure it's functioning well. Then that becomes a very easy and understandable conversation about that.
You also make me think that, a lot of what we've ended up talking about and so many of the podcast topics is that sense of almost making clearer stuff that people already know and have a sense of. They
Mm-hmm.
just didn't know that that's what it was, or maybe didn't have a language for it, or most people know what it's like to feel off balance, and to feel off balance in ways that they can't necessarily physically explain. So
Yeah.
yes, oh, I've been knocked off balance because someone just said a really mean thing to me, but most people will have some sense of, I just feel a bit out of sorts and I don't really know why.
Mm-hmm.
um, which is quite likely something to, I mean, it could be something physical that you're just not aware of, but it's quite likely that it could be more of an energy off balance that you don't have a language or an
Yeah.
understanding. Yeah.
That's a wonderful example, because if you really drill down, it's very hard to get to an explanation that's not energetic. It's not a
Yeah.
physical unbalance. It's not even mental. It's not where your thoughts are going. It
Hmm.
has to be it has to be energetic. And if you really drill that down anyway, I digress. But yeah, so it's an interesting question to answer. It's a hard one. It depends a lot on who your audience is and where they're
Yeah.
willing to go and accept, at least temporarily. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and sometimes people, as with many things, just want to know, how is this going to help me?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than, I
Mm-hmm.
don't care all the ins and outs. Like, maybe you don't want to know exactly how a particular medication works. You just want to know, is this going to make me feel better? And will there be
Yeah.
any side effects?
Yeah.
Like, that's the
Yeah.
important bit.
Mm-hmm.
But for the people who are curious, I think we can absolutely get into more or less detail. And I see the next question on our list is kind of feels like it follows on really nicely from some of the things we've been talking about, which is, can you sense if my energy is blocked right now? And what do you know about me? I love that question. Get asked that.
Yeah,
What can you
it
tell?
really made me think of it when you said that people want to know if you can read their minds and what you
Yeah.
know about them as a psychologist. And
Hmm.
I think that's really, I think, the most technical answer is that it would be unethical to do that, even if I could. But nobody believes you when you say that, you know. But the actual more practical and true answer is it's much more difficult to know anything about anybody if you're not standing in their energy with your hands on them, right? So can you read somebody's energy from across the room and know something about them? Kind of, in the same way that you're listening to a conversation through a muffled wall, right? You might notice that somebody, you might notice that weather, it's like noticing a weather report. You might notice that they're tense, or that they're happy, or that they're scared about something, but there's no real details, and you'd have to look pretty hard. And to be honest, if you're not paying me to do that, why am I working that hard? you know? I'm just not, doing that across the room. It's too difficult. And there's no real detail to that. And what people really want to know is, can you read, what are you going to know my secrets? Are you going to know my secrets? And I think that's not true even when we are standing in somebody's energy field and have more access to people with our hands on them. Um,
Yeah, I think for me, there's things like, sometimes I might have a sense of a particular emotion that maybe
mhm.
hasn't quite admitted to themselves yet, or feels uncomfortable about in some way.
Yeah.
That that's something which I might know about somebody that maybe they might find surprising initially, or hadn't really knew they knew about themselves.
Yeah, I think the closest to that is watching somebody trying really hard to convince a room that they're fine, or convince the room that they're not angry when it's so obvious that they are. And but honestly, I don't know that I'm the only one knowing that. I think we're all so much more obvious than we think that we are. And maybe it's even more obvious to us than it might be to other people, but I think we're much more transparent than we think they are. And I think than we think we are. And I think that loops right back to the podcast, because I think part you alluded to, you said this explicitly, you didn't allude to it, that we're trying to do is to give people the words and the language to the experiences that they're having, in part so that they know they're not crazy and they can understand what's happening, but also so they can build upon that information and take it to the next step. And this is a perfect example of that, because when you are with somebody and you are having these vague impressions that you get from somebody, it is real. And you are getting information from that, even if it's not in detail or very specific. And that's also part of on the podcast, what we're trying to do is to get people to take that information and be able to build upon that. And I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the other thing I would add to that question, can you sense if my energy is blocked right now, is that I will often say to people, I don't know anyone whose isn't. In the same way that, like, a chiropractor have a person lay on their couch. I mean, I've never actually asked a chiropractor this, but I'm willing to bet, I think, that over maybe, I don't know how old, 5, any person that lays, maybe even younger than that, anybody who lays on the couch, the chiropractor will find something that isn't, let's say, perfect alignment. Because we're having experiences, so that I don't think there's a person who exists on the planet that doesn't have some part of their energy system that doesn't, move or flow or isn't in the absolute perfect balance, because none of us are. Maybe I didn't, and that could, it doesn't necessarily mean there's anything major wrong. But we use our bodies, we use our, and we have emotional experiences, and we put nutrition in our body, and we drink water or don't drink water. And, all these things, just like they impact our physical body, they impact our energy system. So, people, I think, can often get a bit stuck on that. Have I got blockages? Well, yes, because everybody does. Yeah. There isn't, are there ones that are really causing you problems? That's a different question. And then is there something we can do to work together to help you release that, or have it be balanced in a different way, or whatever. But that there are blockages is just human. Yeah
I heard somewhere fairly recently somebody said that we have and I wish I remembered where the source was, but it was, we have a public life, a private life, and a secret life. And I thought that was really interesting. And of course, I think what's underneath that question is, can you see my secret life?
And I would add almost another layer to that. We also have a secret life that we keep secret from ourselves. Sometimes kind of actively, and sometimes just, we haven't had the support or opportunity to realize something yet. But yeah, I think there's often whole layers of stuff that we often talk about as blind spots, like stuff that I haven't quite acknowledged, or I'm not ready to admit, or I just haven't realized about. Someone else says something and you're like, oh my goodness, I did not know that, or I didn't have the knowledge to be able to know that, or I was afraid of knowing that, or like all the different reasons. But yeah, interesting.
I wonder if some of the other reasons that question comes up with a little bit of concern and anxiety for people is exactly what you just said, that the worry is, are you going to make me look at my blind spots faster than I'm willing to look at them? Or things that I'm kind of aware are off to the side, but I don't really want to see yet. Or I don't want to see them as faster than I want to see them.
Yeah, I think that's sometimes the case. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's quite hard. It can be quite confronting sometimes. I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
this, in, I mean, this can happen in a medical doctor's office. It can happen in um, a counselor's office. Even a physiotherapist's office. We might learn something about ourselves that we're not quite ready to hear, particularly if it means a big change. I was listening, a good example of this, I was listening to a podcast about hormone replacement therapy for menopause, as I often listen to things about that.
Because we
one
are
of my,
because we are women of that age.
yeah, current topics. And it was actually a woman who'd had breast cancer who was talking about her decision to keep taking some hormones because for her the quality of life, and they were talking about whether she felt because there's often a concern about hormones and cancer risk. And there was a question about whether she felt her HRT had caused her cancer. And she said, to be honest, the way I thought about it was, did my, a couple of years of being on hormone replacement therapy cause my cancer? Or did the 30 or 40 years of me drinking more alcohol than was good for me?
Right. Interesting. Interesting.
Probably it's more likely it was that.
Yeah.
But that can be a hard truth to accept about ourselves, because it also then puts us in a place where, do I have to change that now? If I
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge there's something about myself or something I'm doing that isn't good for me, then I can't keep doing it in ignorance. I can't pretend to myself so if I get something wrong with me that is caused by a behavior that I'm doing, and I don't feel ready to change it, that can be a really uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
place to be.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I
what
just
I would
rather
say
be
to
in denial.
anybody, yeah, what I would say to anybody that's thinking about that is, or concerned about that is, there's absolutely no reason why anybody, like, it doesn't, like, what am I trying to say? Trying to get a body or a system, an energetic system, like a person, to go faster than they, whether or not it's their body, their nervous system, or their mind, or their identity, wants to go or is ready to go for whatever reason, doesn't matter the reason, not only isn't a good idea, because not only is unethical, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not only
Mm-hmm.
is unwelcome, is unethical, but it's also counterproductive, because as
Mm-hmm.
soon as you do that for half a second, the whole system shuts down.
Yeah.
So the answer is no. Like, the person on the table has to set the pace.
Mm.
People often say, and I'm sure you get this too. People often say, "I want to do this as fast as possible. Let's go as I'm a go-getter. I just want to do it." And you're like, I have no control over that. And you set the pace. And when I say you, it's really you, nervous system, identity. It's the whole package. There's no going faster than we're going. And
It's
there's
not
no
really.
revealing anything until it's revealed. It
Yeah.
doesn't, yeah, it doesn't work
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Where are we up to with our questions?
I have one for you. It's your turn. Do I need to believe in energy healing for it to actually work?
Ooh, interesting question. Can I say yes and no?
Only if you explain yourself.
So theoretically, no. I think energy healing works, and it does what it does. In the same way, I don't have to believe that water will hydrate my cells. That's the nature of water and what it will do. And it's unlikely I'll drink adequate amounts of water unless I do have some sense that it does something beneficial for me. So there's that part of it. I mean, like water, I think if I'm really adamant that water is not hydrating and I don't need it, but someone makes me drink it, I can't stop its hydrating nature. So that's what it will do for my body. And I think energy healing is a lot like that. Although I think there's some aspects of it that we are able to kind of, like, I kind of related to what you were just saying, really. And this perhaps is particularly true of the kind of more emotional energy. I think if we're really not, if a person really isn't ready to go there, wherever there is, no amount of energy healing can force them to. So if you come in going, I'm adamant that energy healing can't help my blah, blah, then it will be less likely to be helpful, but not because you have to believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, the best story I have for this was I used to belong to a business group, and I offered everybody in the group a free session. And there was a guy who came along and he said, look, I just came along because I like you and I want to support your business. You seem like a nice person, but I don't really believe all of this stuff. So he lays down on the couch. At the end of the session, he's kind of like, I didn't really feel like anything happened. We talked about it a bit. He told me that I'd asked a few questions at the beginning about his general health, and he told me that he wasn't a great sleeper. Anyway, he rang me up the next morning and said, Karen, I had to call you to tell you that really I left the session thinking that was kind of, well, I mean, I had a nice relaxing lay down, but nothing else happened. And I'm sure she's a very nice person and she means well, but, nothing really happened.
Right.
He said, I have had the best sleep that I can remember having in my adult life. And he was in his 50s or maybe early 60s. And he was just like kind of gobsmacked by this. He was like, nothing else can explain this. I have slept badly my entire adult life. And I had a really, really good sleep. And, and he was kind of like, I apologize.
Yeah,
so
I'm sure you've got many of those examples. I know I do. Yeah. I know I do. And I think the best way to say it is exactly that. Like, you don't have to believe it's going to work, but you do have to kind of not believe it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can't be against it. Right. You can't be anti it.
Yeah, I mean, but I think in the same way, like, I mean, you're probably not going to come for go along with a session if you really are absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in that way it is different than, say, an antibiotic. Like, if you're taking an antibiotic but you're convinced antibiotics are not going to work, they're still going to work. But if you are convinced that the therapist you're seeing is crazy and that she's or he is absolutely awful at their jobs and they're not going to work, they're not going to work either. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're kind of nearly out of time for today's questions, but I know there are more questions in the pipeline, so we will come back to you with some more questions for another episode. In the meantime, please do send any questions in to Carol. You'll find all the contact details in the show notes. I hope you've enjoyed listening to us answer or attempt to answer some of these questions.
It was so much fun. I hope people have more. It was so much fun to answer them.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you for listening, everybody. And please remember to subscribe. Please subscribe. Check us out on all the, the usual places, including YouTube. We'd also love your support on Patreon for just $5 a month. You'd get all kinds of extra bonus material, including journal prompts and all kinds of fun stuff. So we would love for you to do that, make it easier for us to keep doing this. And we'll hope to see you next time.
Bye for now.
Take care.